According to Martin Heidegger, space is not endless and universal, but bounded. Space is thus framed or otherwise delimited phenomenon that does not exist prior to the creation of the boundary. It exists because of the purpose of form. Space allows us to dwell not only because we feel somewhat protected by its limits, but also because it is these limits that allow us to experience space as presence. Boundary is a place of contentment, but as well a place of ongoing struggle. To begin is to open out from the boundary, as the opening appears as a possibility of action. Our group research was about the traces of the past, where we talked about the founding of what has been there from before and still their traces remain. So sand and dust were the main elements in my project, where traces can be provided about the history of the area. The most interesting information that impressed me in the site analysis group work was the Beirut tramway. It was actually a Belgian project, which started in April 1908 in Beirut. The tramway system provided Lebanon with electricity, as well as organizing the time because of its schedule arriving and departing of time, which led to setting of clock towers by the government officials. In 1931, the tramway covered 12 kilometers where it took its passengers in the capital center in a circular line that goes from Marty Square to Riyadh al-Sulah and to the port. So my idea was to extend the tramway line. Nevertheless, as cars became more popular and widely adopted, the tram tracks were removed. It was fully decommissioned in 1968. People said that the tramway system was removed by the Lebanese regime to eliminate anything that is shared among the Lebanese people. That's why the tramway was the most interesting part to me, since it was point of gathering among the Lebanese people, and that's why I want it to be integrated in my project, with the idea of its linear motion and to regain the intimacy among the Lebanese people. In my Rig N, I try to relate my model to the thought of that the boundary is a place of contentment and conflict. My idea was to push and pull the ground to become a limit action. As for that, the earth was the boundary. So, the boundary is a notion of the skin. So, skinning the ground as boundary where the ground is barely pulled out. Model Rig N. While setting kinetics, I try to express how rotational motion can move into transversal motion. In my real life model 1 over 1000, this is an exact replica of the destroyed silos that are that I redid, showing the amount of damage on a small scale, which is 1 over 1000. In the technical drawings, prototypes, as you can see in my prototypes, I made multiple models and site plans where most of them have slight changes between them to develop into the final model. In the technical drawing, this drawing is a site plan of the model, where I chose the silos as my center point and tried to develop it. From it, I made parallel axes. In my array model 1 over 1000, I tried to make my model also according to the axes, which are parallel to the silos and according to the border line. I put my room on the highest level to allow access to the visitors to go underground to the bay, where ships, boats, and yachts can dock on both Q7 and Q8. I tried to play with the levels of the ground as much as possible for the visitors to enjoy the levels of the area. In my final model, I tried to keep the previous mechanism and develop it. I tried to interrelate the idea of the boundary with the notion of the skin, where the boundary now turned from skinning the earth to skinning the volume in space, the incoming cylinder. It becomes a boundary because the inside and the outside now are interrelated. They have a relation between them, but they are distinct. The silos also features as a place of hope, a place of meditation, where I tried to grave the names of those who passed away. Due to its 360 rotational movement, I allowed to cast shadow of the names on the ground all through the day by it following the sun, and at night when the other half joins, the silo lights up to reveal all the names of those who died. In my observational render, I try to represent the identity of my material, where with extreme care and precision that I was able to create strong visuals of the material texture. In these pictures, the site shows the remains that stand as a memory of those who are no longer with us. They embody now the absence of those who were lost. Their remains will allow us to remember them and turn their absence into presence. A sense of disbelief would prevail as the sun rose the next day, casting light on the extent of the damage. The silos were also a refuge through the years of the war, as there was down storage on the ground floor and corridors. Imagine how solid that building was, and now it's the victim. Our entire project is based on how we can revive the area after what happened, where site now allows for things to grow. As for there is grains of on the side that began to sprout. So the grains are some kind a symbol of hope that we can continue but never forget what happened. In situ, I chose to represent history in my project through picking the tramway as a point of inspiration. Since it goes one in one direction and doesn't change its path, the government removed it because of that. I also was mostly interested by the merchants around the port, and especially the Fustukabit sellers. But during the Civil War, all the merchants that used to sell their items in the old souks had to flee the area because it was being shot at, and found refuge near the Corniche to continue selling and to continue resisting. They disappeared as multinational chains took over the area, so it became rare to find these merchants. In my model, I used a Scott shock mechanism where it turns rotational motion into linear motion. The two pieces of the silo that are disjoint recombine together and interlock in one another to make a whole entity. It's a voyage through the time, going from a state that is after the explosion, where the silos deconstruct, to a state before the explosion, where they stand resilient and strong.